Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalue.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list. At some point, every founder has to ask, what happens after me? That's not an easy question, and it's especially difficult if you're a Gen X person and you're handing off to a millennial leader who's got a different style, a different mindset, different pace. That's why navigating succession should be on your leaders list, and it's why Sara Gallagher's on ours. Sara's the head of the Persimmon Group, and she's just gone through this exact same experience, and she's an expert in process. So she has a really unique perspective on this. So if you're thinking about what's next, or more importantly, who's next, sit in. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list. Okay, Sara Gallagher, welcome to the leaders list.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So listen, let's launch into it. I want to get your perspective as an expert in project management and how organizations can become more efficient in that regard. But before we do that, we'd love to know a little bit more about Persimmon and, the stage that you guys are in. So just tell us a little bit about your business.
Sure. Well, I'm Sara. I'm president of the Persimmon Group, but in many ways, I grew up here. So while I had a project management career prior to coming, I really entered the company as sort of a mid-level project manager, and now I'm here, and I would never have predicted that journey.
And now you're the boss.
Yeah, it's weird. It's super weird, but I love it. I love it now. I became president February 28th, 2020. So you do the math, right? We had meticulously planned this transition from the founder. We had outlined every possible scenario and, what was going to be my decision and what still needed to be with the founder. And then everything blew up in a matter of 2 weeks on the job. So, it's been fun. But, so the Persimmon Group does a couple things. Our bread and butter is strategy execution. So a lot of companies focus exclusively on building a strategy, and our sweet spot, although we do that too, is making sure it doesn't just sit on a PowerPoint and it actually gets operationalized. And so we do that through consulting, sometimes with big companies that have PMOs, sometimes with scrappy startups. And we also provide PMs. We pride ourselves on hiring what we call top 5% PMs, meaning you should look back on it and go, man, that PM was in the top 5% I've ever worked with. Mm-hmm. And so we do that as well. And then we do some training in project management and leadership.
That's a bunch.
It is, but there's a through thread, right? It's like we can help you set your strategy. We really excel in helping you execute on that strategy, and then building capabilities in your people that enable the strategy to work.
That's awesome. So with Persimmon, talk about, I think so many organizations are going through this right now, the silver tsunami, right? We talk about this, there's an ownership layer out there that are getting to a point where they're trying to figure out, like, what do I do with the business, when I don't want to keep doing this on a day-to-day basis. So super intrigued about the story between you and your founder. And like you said, you're a perfect example of somebody who looks at a high potential individual in the organization, sees them succeeding, and then says, hey, I think they're capable of more. How did you guys get to a point where, was that your idea? Was it your founder's idea? Talk a little bit about what really happened when that transition took place.
Well, I can tell you it was 100% not my idea.
Okay.
So I think our founder, Bill, had a vision for this before I did. When he pitched it to me, it was probably another 12 to 18 months before I felt like, all right, put me in, coach. looking back on it, one thing he did a very masterful job of was scaffolding in leadership experience. So moving from a mid-level PM to someone who really managed an entire account where maybe we had 3 or 4 PMs, right? Putting me on our biggest clients that required especially leadership without authorities, right? So building that first. Then my first executive role in the company was VP of delivery. And what that essentially meant was I was accountable for building the kind of company that would make our clients ecstatic every time. That was it, right? And that meant potentially training. It meant better delivery processes. It meant hiring better people, right? So in some ways it was sort of a COO, CEO hybrid. And I didn't realize probably at the time that was preparation for the next step. And
that was my next question is whether or not you knew, or was there discussion of succession, or did Bill just kind of identify, were there other people that he was considering in that process?
I don't know. I'm sure just because he's a responsible decision maker, he probably was thinking, do I need to bring in someone from the outside? I think that always should be part of the decision, but I also think, Bill built something really special, and sometimes it can be hard for someone on the outside to figure out, how do we take the business where it needs to go next, which may be different from where we are, but how do we do it without sacrificing what makes us special? Yeah. Right. And so I don't know the answer to that. I've never asked. But I will say I was a reluctant acceptor of the job. And, part of that was, and this is, what I told Bill as well. So he's a male Gen Xer extrovert. And that's important because I am a millennial woman introvert. So how we, while philosophically we're very aligned on the type of company that we want to build, how we go about it sometimes is quite different, right? So I'm a contemplator. I don't like to think out loud all the time. I'm unlikely to, I like to say debate is his love language, and open-mindedness is my superpower. And so, all sides of the same coin, both have their pitfalls. But I was worried, taking over for a beloved founder, how much autonomy will I really have? I mean, how is he really going to let go? Because he made a couple running starts at this before. And, it's just hard when you are kind of married to the adrenaline rush, as many, really motivated people are. So, so like I said, I didn't take the job until I knew exactly where the autonomy was and what his plan was to get me to full autonomy on what timeline. That's what I needed to know. I was not interested in being a, how did I word it to him? A kind of lieutenant, right? That is responsible for the results, but not the inputs that get you there, which is a really difficult spot to be in.
Yeah, no, it's a horrible spot. And what's really interesting about this are just principles of good project management and people in the PMO role, right? Because oftentimes they don't have control on the inputs at the same level. So that's naturally you guys would be good at that. But that's pretty cool. And that was over, you've been there almost 14 years, right?
That's right. I think I just hit 13 this summer. So,
so you're on your way.
It's been a long time. Now, in consulting, I will say it's almost like you cram 3 years of experience into every year, because the clients you work with are so varied. And in my discipline, it's really industry agnostic, right? So I've worked in energy, finance, nonprofit, education. So you're just learning so much about how all different types of organizations work, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I did not want to be bored. That said, and this is what I tell new consultants all the time, you really have to get used to this pervasive, intrusive thought that maybe you suck at your job, right? That imposter syndrome, because the minute you feel like you got good at something, now the next year you're doing something bigger and different and more complex, right? So you just never stop, and it's hard.
Yeah. Now that's super intriguing. So in terms of Persimmon, how many consultants do you have, or how many folks do you have, and how are they structured in the organization?
Yeah, so we oscillate between 20 and say 25 employees for the most part. Up to this point, that was a very intentional decision. I know most small businesses are scale. That's not really what we wanted. We wanted to stay at the size where we felt like we could do really meaningful work, treat our employees really, really well, not become the kind of consulting firm where you've got people flying somewhere on a Monday and staying till a Friday and never seeing their families, right? So we've stayed there really intentionally. But what that means is we have very few defined narrow roles. So we still operate in many ways like a startup where, for example, I have our principal consultant who's like our chief agilist, right? Agile being a approach to project management. And she also has marketing experience because that's where she did Agile, right? So this extremely talented woman not only consults with companies who are trying to build agility and teaches workshops and classes about that, she also runs a lot of our marketing, right? So, and that is just very typical, where we figure out what people are good at and how much time they have, right, as the constraint. And we build and adapt and evolve roles based on that.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because you have that individual in the organization. You have to, you leverage them as much as possible. Right. If you don't have the client work, then it makes perfect sense. But there's a difference between the conscious decision that a portion of the time will be used for that versus when you've got an opening. So do you frame a percentage of the time? Like, I know you actually work on clients as well.
I do.
Is that a constant for Persimmon, where you're working on clients as well as taking an internal job?
That's right. And that is unique about, I think, working in a consulting firm, and particularly a small consulting firm. And the balance, right, is I need to do that work also, so I understand the field we're in. And, if I were to stay out of it for too long, I wouldn't know how to run a business that does it, because I'm out of touch with the industry, right? So there's a certain amount that I need to do. It's also a love of mine, so I don't want to give it up, but I have to be really realistic about how much I can do and still run a great company. Yeah. That split for me is 60-40, 60% running the business and 40% training. So that amounts to about 100 hours of consulting that I can do in a month. That drives what I charge, because it's a scarce resource, and we have plenty of business. So, and then it also drives what I do versus what another consultant does. And what's been really important to me is that we don't build a business around me. I may be out there, building our brand and doing consulting work, but it should not feel like I'm the consultant and the other 23 people are out there supporting me. I want people who are geniuses in their own right, in areas maybe that I'm not as strong in, who, I might coach them on what it looks like to be in their field in a consulting capacity versus maybe where they came from. So I'm preparing them to operate within this new context, but I'm not building this unsustainable machine that relies on me. And that actually includes bringing in the business. It's not relying on me to bring in the business either.
Right, right. So when Bill was running the company, was he more, because he was an original founder, right?
Yeah.
Was the business more built around him? And did you start to change that? Because this leads me to, we're going to talk about the 60%. It leads me to that question of how did you define your own leaders list? And how has that changed? So, but let's just go back to that point about, what it was like when Bill was running it versus you.
Yeah, I would say Bill, first of all, I think he would have had trouble giving up the billable work because it's what really excited him. Yep. I think, so his mix was probably 90-10, 90% billable, 10% running the company. Now, he always made sure to surround himself with people who could shore up that gap. And so, it was still a well-run company, but it was hard to get to the place where it was, a strong, profitable operation that wasn't dependent on him as the founder to bring in the business and then work the business. So that was a key priority and one that we decided on together. Success was I should be able to step totally out and you guys still run a profit. And we had never achieved that before, right? But that was the goal. And I am proud to say we got there within about 3 years, and that included the pandemic years.
Yep, that's great. That's great. Well, the pandemic years probably, brought a lot of opportunity because a whole lot of organizations were trying to figure out like how do we actually get work done?
Yeah.
During that time. So. But let's go back to that question about your leaders list, right? You've got about 25 people. You've done the work of transitioning it from, a leader and everyone following to now you have people who are taking on effective roles and leading that. What's on your leaders list? Like, what are the things that you're focused on right now as, the leader of an SMB? What's the priorities?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I think like most leaders, it feels like those change quickly. One of the things I've learned is to design for change and not for stability, and to get real comfortable with the fact that things change. And I'll give you an example. I would say, key business sustainability priority, and one that I'm staying engaged in, where I've significantly delegated other things, is what is AI search going to do to our flow of leads, right? So in the past, a great deal of our business came from referrals and repeat customers, but it also, probably a third to 40% came from inbound leads. So people who found us online, they liked our thought leadership, they followed it for a while, they called us. And that's always been really strong. I don't know how many small businesses are following this, but people are increasingly turning to like a chat GPT to answer questions that we used to answer through our thought leadership. And that's how we got the keyword traffic and all of those things. Now they can chat it, into GPT. It's going to steal our content and it's going to reframe it, rewrite it. Now they never have to visit our site, right? Now, they might also type in what are the best, PM firms. And that's the kind of search we have to go after. So a really interesting thing that, firms may not be thinking about, but has been a difference, is we have to balance writing for the AI bot, which means, and it's lazy, right? So it's looking for, this is why it relies a lot on Reddit or top 10 listicles, right? And you have to just be super clear about who you are and consistent about it across every channel in the web, right? But you don't want to write only for the bot, because you need to convince people to call you, and they're not going to do that if you're not saying anything original and useful. So being able to figure out what that marketing strategy looks like, what sales looks like, and doing that in a way that doesn't sacrifice who we are. We've never been about outbound, lead generation, never been about cold calls, and we don't want to start now. So that is top of my leaders list right now in terms of looking 5 years down the road at sustainable inflow of business.
Interesting, because so you playing that role versus the person that you have in marketing. I can understand, because it is strategic, and it works
not
across
versus
the
not
entire
versus.
organization.
It's an and.
Right. So
yeah.
So this gets into the leaders list and who owns. Right.
Uh-huh.
So would you assume that you are accountable and your marketing person is responsible? Or do you both carry the same rock and you have two names on it? I use the term rock. I mean, is it the same initiative and objectives?
So we have 3 people, including myself, who are active in the marketing side. Mm-hmm. You have one person who is she's a good strategic thinker, but she's also our technical expertise. So she's also looking at how the AI looks at the back end of our website, right?
Sure.
And then my other marketing person, she's really good at strategy related to, say, lead magnet marketing campaigns. And remember, she's billable too, so she can't run this all herself either. Right. And my zone of excellence, right, is generating content that reflects our philosophy, that delivers useful help to clients, but also people who may not be able to afford us. That's okay too, because they'll refer us. So that piece, the generation of content and the building of my personal brand, that's the lane I'm staying in. So I'm very careful not to go into their lanes and to listen to their advice as I build out my lane. And then, all 3 of us are also thinking, again, how do we not build the business around just Sara Gallagher's brand? How do we always tie me to Persimmon and do that strategically? So I'm very lucky that we work so well together. They are geniuses and highly invested. And so we're learning all this together, but it's like, we're learning new things every week about how this works, as is everybody.
Right.
I will say,
because it's changing that quickly.
It is. And, advice I would give to other SMBs right now is, if you can remember the blogosphere, right? When that started to get big, or podcasting is another example, the early players secured real estate that was really hard for other people to steal later. And so our thinking is, we got to get good at this, and we got to get good at it fast, because, staking a claim, it's hard for other people to catch up. And so I think even if people are not loving this idea of having to get engaged in marketing, now is the time. I would not wait.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because there's the law of shitty click-throughs, right? I mean, if you aren't focused on what's new and happening and changing, then, to your point, if you're a fast follower, that can work. But if you're a slow follower, it's very hard to make that an effective shift. So I think that's great counsel to give. Yeah. Sara, you mentioned something, I thought you've said it several times, like your zone of genius. And I just love the way you think about structuring roles and how you put people in positions to win. And so this shifts a little bit more into some of the practice areas that Persimmon thinks about, and then how you run the business. But talk a little bit about that and just how you approach that to make sure that you're putting people in a position to win. Yeah.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that this does not come naturally to me. I like control. It is how I got to where I am, is being, heavily invested in the way that I get to the next achievement, right? So this did not come naturally. I really had to be forced into it by life. So, when I took over as president, I was in my first or second year of sobriety, actually. So, like many women, I dealt with stress in an unhealthy way. And it was fast. So a lot of women do what's called telescoping, which is you have no problem until you do, and then it's fast, right? And I'm very lucky. I recognized that this was not healthy. And so I made the decision, I'm not going to do it anymore. But that's tough. And that's a big transition. And a big part of it was my personal life was suffering because that's how I was dealing with work. Work was taking over a greater and greater percent of mind share. So I figured out pretty quick once the crisis of the pandemic had passed that I had to do the 60-40 split. I could not do the 90-10 split. And so the exercise I did to get there is I got a piece of paper, and this was not my idea, but I don't remember where I got it, or I would cite my source. So this was not my thing, but I thought it was great. I got a piece of paper, I divided it into 4 quadrants. And at the top left, I put, I'm uniquely good at doing this. And in the upper right, I am not uniquely good at doing this. And then on the left-hand side, the factors were, I love doing this, or meh, right? I do it because I have to, but I don't love it. So what that created were 4 zones. And the zone I wanted to stay in the most is, and you mentioned it, the zone of genius. That's where I am uniquely good at something and I love doing it. I could stay there forever. Then you have your zone of excellence. And this is where I am uniquely good at doing it, but I could take it or leave it. If I have to live in that quadrant, I'm going to get burned out. The bottom 2 take a lot of humility because you have to admit you're not uniquely good at it, or that you could quickly train someone to be as good as you. And so, your zone of competence is, I could do it, but so could someone else, but I really do like doing it. And that's the hardest to let go of. And then the really brutally named zone of incompetence, which is, I'm really not good at this and I hate it. Some things, I'm not going to make someone else fill out my billable hour sheet, right? Like, some of it you can't delegate. But what it did was it helped me design my way of being president, which was going to be different than Bill's, right? So what are the areas of the business I'm uniquely good at and I can contribute the most? And what are those things that I really need to coach other people to do instead? And so I designed my role first, and then I designed the leadership roles I needed. And to some extent, I designed that around what the business needed. And to some extent, I designed it around people who I wanted to be the future of Persimmon and what their zones of genius were. And rather than write job descriptions, I borrowed a page out of the EOS playbook and really made them more like role accountabilities. So if your function were going as well as it possibly could, this is what it would look like. And I don't care what initiatives you launch. I don't care how you get there within reason, within our ethics and our guiding principles, right? And we should have a dialogue about that. But you are both responsible for the outcome and you have autonomy with the method.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that with such candor. I think it's just reality, right? That's what leaders go through a lot. And so I commend you for being smart enough to recognize the need for that balance and for using that framework. Key to that entire thing is introspection. Right? Being able to look at yourself and what you're really capable of. Yeah. And that's a natural transition to what companies deal with and what leaders deal with. Obviously, it's not unique to you. Yeah. And it's probably where that whole concept of CEO bottleneck comes
Yeah.
from. And there's a lot of individuals that we work with where, they don't see that, don't want to see that, or the organization does not allow them to see that.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different reasons for it, but I'm curious, how does Persimmon go about helping organizations that are, and individuals specifically, that are dealing with that CEO bottleneck? Do you find that is, best served by creating a PMO team, or do you have to change the CEO's mindset, or how does Persimmon start with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think let me start by saying what we don't do and then what we do instead, because I think that's really important. So, what we don't do is we don't come with our standard playbook or model TM, right? And some companies do, and that's okay. There are proven maturity model for XYZ. I get that, but that's not us. Instead, we, as quickly as we can, get to know the whole system of the client. And, so we talk about a STAR model, which is not really a approach. It's more of a way of analyzing a system. Systems being unpredictable, right? Lots of things that interplay with each other. And if you change one thing, there could be unintended consequences for another. So the components that we look at, first of all, are strategy. What are you trying to do in the marketplace? Then, around the STAR, we're looking at three things you've probably heard of: people, process, tools, right?
Sure.
People being, what are the skill sets you have versus what are the ones you need? Process, the important thing here is, I don't mean your documented process. I mean your informal, under the table workflows too, right? Tools might be something like Excel spreadsheets that you use, or it could be, an Asana or a Monday.com, or it could be something much more intense. Yeah. But then we look at two other things: culture. And by that, I don't mean, do you have a foosball table in your office? And I don't mean necessarily only your guiding values. The way that I would describe it, and in fact, I ask CEOs to think about this. If one of your employees got asked by a friend, what is it like to work there? Whatever it is they say is your culture, right? And so we try to figure that out quickly. And then the fifth one is structure. Are you structured in a way to effectively execute on what you need? And so the quadrants we talked about deals with structure. Okay, so once we have a picture of that, then we can start to figure out what levers to pull to help that CEO or founder or big company move the needle. Now, what I will say, so similar to where, and I'm not in medicine, obviously, but where you have a patient who's in an emergent situation, you got to get them stable first. Usually the process to get them stable is known. Then you figure out what the diagnosis is and how to help them long-term. For me, the stabilizing piece is usually about prioritization, knowing what it is that's on your plate, what matters the most. And so I borrow a page from Agile project management for this. So, waterfall or predictive or traditional project management, you decide what you're going to go do, you execute it for, anywhere from 3 to 9 months, and then you deliver something at the end. Agile is unique in that the scope changes all the time. You have, rather than a scope, you have what's called a backlog. And it doesn't mean list of things that are backed up. It literally means what is the list of stuff you want to achieve. And what's different about it, number one, is it's force ranking, top to bottom, right? What is most important to you now? So I always say prioritization has the word prior in it. What are you going to do prior to doing something else? So these frameworks that just say, I'm going to rank everything high, medium, low, don't work, because if it were low, it wouldn't be on your list. You have to make the hard decisions, right? So I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at how transparent is that backlog to everybody else. Do they understand why something is first versus why something else is fifth, right? And I'm looking at, does everything have a clear owner? Really, only when that's clear and stabilized, right? And you watch for a while, can you tell what's getting in the way of achieving those things? Is it culture? Is it structure? Right? Is it all five and they're interplaying with each other? And that's really where the hard intellectual work starts.
So that's interesting, Sarah, because that sounds like full-on large-scale management consulting, as opposed to project management focused on execution and executing strategy. How do you guys balance that? Because or do the types of clients that you work with want you to come in and be in the organization for a while and help them make, long-term structural change, or are there quick hits? Just how do you approach that?
Well, first of all, you're hitting on the dirty little secret of project management, which is it is not a tactical discipline, actually. It is the mechanism by which strategy becomes real. And that's what made me fall in love with it once I figured that out, right? So a company may come to us and say, we're not getting our projects done, or they're taking twice as long as they should. Help us figure out what's wrong. What is unique about us is we don't go in with our, okay, well, you need to have a charter and you need to have a schedule, and your schedule needs to be resource loaded. And right, we're not looking at some best practice list and then comparing them to that. We're looking at the system. And honestly, that's when people pick us, it's because we're transparent about that up front and they like that idea.
Yeah.
And that also
you're looking for the root cause.
Yeah. And that also tends to weed out clients who are not going to like what we deliver. Right.
Yeah.
And so that is like the main thing right there. The large scale, versus small scale, are we talking about a PMO? And for those that don't know what that is, especially big companies, although I've seen plenty of small ones too that have this, stands for Project Management Office. And it can look lots of different ways, but essentially it is where you assign a department to executing your most important initiatives. Sometimes that looks like a group that offers, templates, tools, and training, and is just supportive. Other times it looks like a department that actually has PMs reporting to it that go execute things.
Yeah.
Right. But not everything needs a PMO, though a lot of the principles are the same.
So when you're talking about an organization that has a CEO bottleneck and they're trying to identify, is that because of the system? Is it because we don't have a PMO? Is it because we need to change the leader? Those are all very different perspectives. But like you said, the through line is very clear, right? So the challenge is clear. I would refer to that as the execution gap, like the difference between, this idea that we have and then the results. So when you're going through that, are you working first and foremost with the executive to change their mind? Like, what's the first change once you've identified the situation? What's the first change you're trying to make?
Yeah. So yes, to your first question, we work directly with executives, generally speaking. Now, that could be a director or VP level, but we're typically not working with middle management, because the kind of change it takes to get good at strategy has to have support from the top, right?
Yep.
When we look at that system, we basically give our client two things. The first is an insights report that does not get into solutions. It just says, here's what's getting in your way. Here are the key themes, right? Here's why it matters to you. Literally, these are the slides. Here's what's in your way. Here's why it matters to you, right? Here's what could become possible if we could address it. Then we share those and we actually give the client an opportunity to push on us, hey, I'm not sure that's right, and here's why, and maybe you didn't see this document, but here's what we've got, doesn't often change our perspective, but sometimes it does. And we want to make sure we're on the same page before we get to recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I will say about recommendations is, well, two things. One is we employ a crawl, walk, run philosophy. So we don't want to hand them recommendations they're not going to see any value from for 1 to 2 years. We want to alleviate what pain we can early on. The second thing, getting to your earlier question of, do we typically work with clients for multiple years or for a short period of time? We build our recommendations as self-contained and detailed enough that if that CEO wanted to do everything themselves or through their people without us, they could. They have enough context to know exactly what they need to do. Or they can hire us to help implement. And I would say we have clients who do both approaches and are wildly happy either way, right?
Yep.
So, and usually it depends on the complexity and how much, expertise that client feels that they have internally relative to what we're recommending.
Got it. And when does this typically happen for an organization? Like, I could imagine you mentioned the scrappy startup. That's about changing a CEO's perspective and a founder's perspective. Once you get to a certain size, that's about literally putting people in place and understanding the principles of project management. And then once you get to another size, that's about developing a PMO.
Right.
What are the typical triggers that make somebody pick up the phone and call you?
Yeah. So from an executive perspective, you've probably seen this. We're all frustrated by the same things. We feel like people aren't moving at the speed of our ideas. And this is actually mutually frustrating. We experience it as, man, I'm already on to the next thing, and you guys don't have this part finished. The team experiences it as, we're barely started on what you wanted last week and you're already adding things to our list, right? That is a really common pain point, a symptom that an executive notices that is both strategically and usually personally frustrating. I would say that is what comes to us most often. Now, there's also a common thing where the CEO has already thought about this problem and some software vendor has come to them and told them that their tool can solve that problem. Right. And so they come to us saying, we want you to help us implement XYZ. And that is the kind of client that either we need to change their mind, not that they won't ultimately implement that tool, they might, or we need to say, no, thanks. Right. Because it's such a mistake to think a tool will save you. It just does. In fact, in the STAR model I was talking about before, it's the very last thing that we look at, unless it's a tool that's already in place that is such a headache that it is getting in the way, right? But we don't really look at bringing in new tools because it just won't make up for a culture with a lack of urgency. It won't make up for, a structure that revolves around the CEO and doesn't make use of other people's zones of genius. It won't make up for a workforce that has no experience or training in running projects. So I would say, honestly, those are the two things that usually bring companies of all sizes to us. One of which I love, the first one, right? And because we can do something about that and the CEO doesn't already have a bias. The second one, we really have to get them off the mark of that for long enough to determine whether it will work, right? Yeah. So I'm not asking them not to do it. Yeah, I'm not asking them not to do it. I'm not even asking for them to wait 6 months to do it. We will determine pretty quickly if that's the right way to go. And if it is, we can go there. But man, it's such a common mistake for and look, I get it. We all think we can solve our own problems all of the time because we did it for long enough to get here, right? So it breeds this toxic overconfidence, I think. And you know, I joke with Bill that he is almost always right. He's never in doubt. And I say that with the finger pointing squarely back at me because I am made in his image in many ways, right? And I just think it's really common.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring up, I mean, that point of view about how CEOs they just feel like the organization can't keep the same pace. That's literally what drove me to starting Proxy, because
Yeah.
I would just see this challenge that we refer to as management metabolism.
Yeah.
You know, the organization cannot keep pace, and there's reasons for that, right? So if
Yeah.
you explain to a CEO, you have complete purview to the entire organization, and you've been a futurist and you're thinking about what's coming next, and you're in that mindset, it's really difficult to take someone who's in a functional role and have them be able to naturally accept all that same input in a short period of
Yeah.
time and be able to execute on it. So that makes perfect sense. I love your point also about the software solution, right? Everybody wants a silver bullet, and oftentimes we sub-optimize, right? We fix the thing that we think is the real problem. It's not the root problem.
That's
so I
right.
can understand that as well. How do you help them understand what, and maybe this is just a better question of how do you decide what success looks like? When you work with an organization, like you brought up the point that someone comes to you and says, hey, we're not getting projects done at the pace we should. Well, that assumes that they're tracking project pace and success.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Which I find most organizations are not. You know, even if they're using like an EOS and they have rocks, like, you know, that is a close examination of key initiatives. So then you can say, okay, that happens. But what does success typically look like after you work with an organization?
It is so interesting you use that phrase, because it is a requirement of all of our consultants, including me, that when you kick off the engagement, you formally get from your sponsor two things. The first is what success looks like for what you're solving for. Okay. So I worked with a client, came to me because they weren't moving at the speed of their ideas, right? They had all their resources in 3 long projects and no capacity to execute on fast wins. And I asked them, if everything changed overnight and it worked the way you wanted it to, what would that look like? This isn't goals. It's not KPIs. It's literally, what is your desired end state? And it takes some coaching back and forth to get there. So for example, someone might say, you know what, I want to really standardize the way that we do projects. One common playbook for how we do this. So then I'll ask, okay, what would happen if I were able to get all of your projects predictably delivering on time, but nothing was standardized? Would you be okay with that? Right? So we're forcing trade-offs. We're forcing really thinking through, okay, I know you say standardization matters. What's the reason? Right? And so we actually write out anywhere between 1 and 3 success looks like statements for the recommendations themselves. What should everything be driving to? And then we also create success looks like statements for our relationship, right? So as you and I work together, what does success look like? What would make you refer me at the end of this engagement, right? What should the experience feel like? Now, we have guiding principles internally. We actually have a document we call our consulting manifesto that talks about what consulting looks like for us, what sales looks like, what excellence looks like in all of these areas. But that may be a little different from what the sponsor wants. And so we need to know that difference at the outset.
That's super helpful. So again, like it's different for every organization you work for, or do you find commonality as well?
Oh, both. it is different for every company we work for. And I come back to that system thing, right? Systems are not predictable. You change one thing and a whole bunch of other stuff changes too. But that's also just a function of like everything is so complex that no two companies look alike. And the minute you start to, so here's how I would say it. The sooner in the process you think you know what's going on, the more suspicious you should be, right? It is really important to stay intellectually neutral until the last responsible moment. And then you can start to make some statements, right, about what's going on. So I think that is really, really important. What was the
really
second part of your?
That's great. That's great
Yeah.
counsel, because I mean, like, I think about, if you're solving a fire versus you're building something foundationally, or you're thinking about the future, those deserve to have different time applied to it.
Yep.
So your whole point about, like, am I putting a tourniquet on this to stop bleeding? Or, am I getting to the root cause so they can actually solve this and not have it happen again? That's just great perspective to take a company through and help them understand. Sara, I could talk to you about this for the next 10 days. And I love a lot of the content that you put out. I think your blog, Big Dumb Questions, is really, really smart, because I think it's great that you have to be open and have candor and think differently. And so Big Dumb Questions is just a great lead into it.
Thank you.
Before we cut off, I just want to ask, is there anything that you would recommend? First thing, I just got done listening to you. I love the idea. I hear that, yes, I have bottlenecks. I'm in one of those two situations. I'm about to buy some software. What are the things that you would recommend? What's one thing that you would say after you listen to this, go do this and put it on your leaders list?
Honestly, of everything we talked about, I think figuring out what your zone of genius is and building your structure to accommodate not just speed, but also the customer outcomes that you want, the operational outcomes, the financial outcomes that you want. To me, all right, that is the part of the system, besides also prioritization, right? That is almost always true, that you need those two things in place, right? So you could start with either one. You could start by building your backlog. Some CEOs find that to be an immensely cathartic experience, right? Just to get that on paper, force priority, right? Be open to change. That list will change, right? The stuff will get added, stuff will get rearranged. That's the purpose of an agile backlog. So I think a lot of CEOs prefer to start there. Some CEOs, though, at this point are just drowning in doing too much. And so the exercise of those quadrants, I think, is a really approachable thing that you could do in an hour and a half. And you will learn a lot just by doing the exercise. Then you could take the next few weeks to start redesigning your role, right? But I think you're going to get a lot of utility just from doing it. So I would say either or of those two things, depending on where you are, but both tend to have really important impacts, regardless of what your other root causes might be.
I love it. Sara, you can't beat a good list and a 4-box matrix, right? I
mean,
that's
what I'm saying.
Everything revolves around that. Listen, this has been fantastic, Sara. Thank you again for being on the leaders list, and we'll put all your contact info in the show notes. And so I highly recommend, if you're an organization that's thinking about PMOs and how to build that kind of structural and integrity and discipline and how work gets done, Persimmon Group's a great option for you.
Thank you, Bryon. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sara.